The wind tore at her coat like it wanted to rip her right out of the ground. Grace Whitmore stepped down from the stagecoach into a swirl of cold mountain air and 100 distrustful stares. Her boots sank into the dirt street of Evermeadow, a place so far from polished society it felt like the absolute end of the world. And maybe that was the point. In one hand, she gripped the handle of a scuffed leather trunk. In the other, a yellowed letter signed by a man named Daniel Mercer. A man who'd promised her marriage, a partnership, a place to finally belong. Her heart hammered against her ribs, echoing the sound of carriage wheels fading into the distance. She was alone. Again. Across the street, a storekeeper paused mid-sweep, his brows pinched with something that looked a lot like pity. From the saloon window, eyes watched, but they didn't welcome. And just beyond the general store, where a white fence should have been, there was nothing. Nothing but blackened timber and a plot of land still smelling faintly of smoke. Grace froze. The homestead had burned to the ground. The address on her letter matched the crooked, half-melted mailbox at the edge of the ash field. A single horseshoe hung from a charred post, split right down the center, like something that was once whole and now hopelessly broken. Her breath caught in her throat, but she refused to let tears fall. Not here. Not in front of these people. A low whistle cut through the silence, then a voice. "You the mail-order bride for Daniel Mercer?" She turned. A boy, no older than 15, spoke from a wagon loaded down with lumber. His face was a constellation of freckles under a hat 2 sizes too big. He didn't seem unkind, just curious. "Yes," she said, her voice steadier than her legs felt. The boy frowned. "Mercer died in the fire." He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly. "Weeks ago. House caught a lightning strike in the middle of the night. Folks say he barely got out the front door before the whole place just came down." Her fingers tightened on the trunk's handle until her knuckles were white. "He died." "Well," the boy corrected himself, chewing on a piece of straw. "Disappeared. Nobody ever found a body. Could be he just ran. Didn't owe anyone much." He paused, then added, "You can ask Mr. Reed. He knew him some." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Who's Mr. Reed?" "Samuel Reed. Carpenter. Lives up past the ridge." The boy's eyes held a strange mix of respect and fear. "Folks say he fought in the war. Lost an arm but kept his grit. He built Mercer's porch right before the fire." He gestured toward the foothills that clawed at the sky beyond the town's edge. Grace followed his gaze, seeing nothing but pine trees wrapped in mist and a future carved from pure uncertainty. "What are you going to do now, miss?" the boy asked, his voice a little softer this time. Grace lifted her chin, her eyes fixed on the ruined land. "I'm staying." He blinked, confused. "Even with no house? No Mercer?" She turned toward the scorched earth and whispered, mostly to herself, a promise that felt like a prayer. This was never about the man. That night she slept in a tool shed at the edge of the charred property. Her trunk served as both a pillow and a barricade against the scratching of mice behind the boards. The moon hung in the sky like a cold silver witness. Her father's voice, a ghost from a life she'd burned down herself, echoed in her mind. "You'll never survive without your name." She'd buried that name long ago. Grace Whitmore was supposed to be dead, at least on paper. The world had seen to that. She'd signed the letter to Daniel as Grace Walker, a name she'd pulled from a gravestone in a book about frontier widows. The irony was a bitter pill. A distant howl cut through the night, and her fingers instinctively went to the locket at her throat. It was the only thing she hadn't pawned. Inside, there was a tiny sketch of a woman smiling, and behind her, the dark skyline of a factory drawn in charcoal. She had once overseen a textile empire. Now she didn't even have a roof over her head, but she had land, and land could be rebuilt. Morning found her dragging her trunk up a gravel road that twisted through the hills like a wounded snake. Her boots were caked in soot, her skirt torn at the hem, but she kept walking. She wasn't looking for Charity. She was looking for the carpenter. She found him shaping timber with one arm. He stood outside a small cabin with a slanted roof, sawdust coating his boots like a second skin. A clever leather brace looped around his shoulder, connecting to a wood plane he balanced against a table with his hips. With a slow, practiced motion, he shaved a plank down to a fine, perfect edge. His dark hair curled against his neck, and a jagged scar curved from his temple to his jaw, a punctuation mark from another life. She stood quietly, waiting until he finally noticed her. "You lost?" he asked, his voice rough, like unsanded wood. "I was told you worked on Daniel Mercer's homestead." His jaw tightened. "A long time ago. He's gone. The house is gone." He wiped his hand on a cloth, but didn't offer it. "I heard," she said. "I want to rent the land. What's left of it." He squinted at her, his eyes taking in her fine, though worn, clothes. "That land's headed to a tax auction in 2 months. Wasn't yours then. Isn't yours now." "It will be," she said, the words tasting like defiance. "I'm not afraid of auctions." He tilted his head, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. "Who are you?" She looked him straight in the eye, unflinching. "Someone willing to pay. I'll work if you don't want charity, but I need help. I need to know what's salvageable." For a long, tense moment, neither of them spoke. The wind was the only thing that moved. Then he turned and opened the cabin door. "You can sleep in the loft. Tools stay downstairs, and don't touch the whiskey." She didn't smile. Not yet. But her voice was firm. "I won't." That night, as the fire cracked low in the hearth, Grace stared up at the beams above her bedroll. The air smelled of sawdust and oil. She wasn't sure if Samuel Reed was a man she could trust, but he hadn't asked for anything, and he hadn't tried to turn her away. And that was enough. Below, she could hear him moving, quiet and precise, one-armed and still building. She closed her eyes and made a vow to herself. If he can build with one hand, I can rebuild with two. She didn't come here to marry a man. She came to reclaim something far deeper than a name, and she would. The next morning broke with the smell of pine smoke and freshly sawn wood. Grace woke to the rhythmic scrape of Samuel's plane, the sound of a man at war with timber. The loft space was small, but it was warmer than the shed. Through the cracks in the floorboards, she could see him below, balancing a plank between his knees, guiding the plane with that intricate harness of leather and steel. There was a raw elegance in the motion, born from necessity, not from grace. She descended the ladder, trying to be quiet, but he'd already noticed her. "Coffee's cold, but there's some left." "Thank you," she said, pouring a cup from the tin pot on the stove. It was bitter and strong, and it was exactly what she needed. They worked in silence that morning. She sorted wood, measured cuts, and swept shavings into a bin. Samuel didn't talk much, but he didn't hover. He let her move, let her figure things out, even when she fumbled a measuring square. It was a kind of trust she hadn't been offered in years. "You ever work with wood?" he finally asked. "No." My hands were raised softer. "That's so," he said, not unkindly. "They look steady now." She paused, her fingers wrapped around the worn grip of a hammer. "Steady isn't the same as unshaken." He didn't respond, but the corner of his mouth twitched, maybe in approval. That afternoon, she asked to see the land. They walked the path toward the blackened homestead. The last of the snow had melted, revealing scorched earth and brittle weeds. The air still carried the faint, ghostly scent of smoke. Grace stood at the edge of the ruin, her eyes scanning the remains. "Anything left?" "Stone foundations," he said, his voice low. "Cracked in places, but salvageable. Some of the fencing, too. Soil's good under the ash. And the well's untouched. Miracle, that one. Why didn't the town claim it? He shrugged. No next of kin. And Daniel owed more in taxes than he had in friends. The property just sat while the paperwork floated in circles. You're just the first one stubborn enough to walk in and claim it. I'll pay the debt, she said, brushing ash from a fallen beam, and I'll file for ownership. Samuel studied her, his gaze sharp. You got the money? She didn't blink. I will. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind sighing through the pines. I can help you rebuild, he said finally, but I don't work for free. I wouldn't insult you by asking. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not affection, not yet. Something closer to a shared language. Grit. Over the next week, they began to clear the debris. Grace hauled boards, hammered nails, and wiped sweat from her brow. Her skirts tore more. Her hands blistered, but she didn't complain. Samuel noticed. He didn't say much, but one morning he handed her a pair of leather gloves without a word. She wore them like armor. In town, the whispers began. Helen Monroe, a widow who had once set her sights on Samuel, leaned against the post office counter when Grace came to wire money under the name Grace Walker. Don't see many women dressed like that around here, Helen said, her voice coated in sugar and poison. I wasn't aware there was a dress code for the Telegraph, Grace replied without looking up from her papers. Helen's smile tightened. Just be careful, dear. Men around here are simple. Too much mystery can make them skittish. Grace finally looked up, a smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. And too little mystery makes them bored. Back at the ridge, Samuel asked no questions. But he saw the way she folded receipts, the way she counted every copper coin, the way she signed papers with a name that didn't quite seem to fit her. One evening, as they sat by the fire nursing tin cups of stew, he finally broke the quiet. You planning to stay? Grace stared into the flames. I never planned to run. Doesn't answer the question. She looked at him then, her face open for the first time. Yes, I want roots. I want something that's mine, not inherited, not borrowed. Built, he said, nodding once. Then you'll need to buy that land before the auction closes. They don't hold property for good intentions. I'll wire the final payment in 2 days. He studied her carefully. Most folks who come here broke don't pay their taxes ahead of time. I'm not most folks. That night, as she climbed into the loft, she whispered her real name into the darkness. Grace Whitmore. She let it hang in the rafters like a ghost. In the weeks to come, the snow melted completely, revealing the true shape of the land. Grace and Samuel drew plans by candlelight for a new home, modest but strong, with a workshop right beside it. A place where skill met purpose. On the day she rode to town to submit her final bid for the auction, she passed a man stepping off the train platform. He wore a tailored coat, and he tipped his hat at her, but his eyes were too sharp, too familiar. Charles Barrington. She didn't stop, she didn't flinch, but inside, every alarm bell she possessed began to scream. Her past had found her, but this time she wasn't running, she was building, and she wasn't alone. Grace didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in the loft, listening to the creak of timber and the whisper of the wind. Outside, melting snow trickled from the roof, a sign of the slow thaw of spring. But inside her chest, the cold had returned. Charles Barrington. She hadn't seen him in almost 2 years. Not since the day she'd walked away from the Whitmore legacy, from the lawyers, the shareholders, the company that bore her mother's name. He'd been more than a family associate. He'd been a hunter in a silk suit, tasked with keeping her leashed to a fortune she no longer wanted. And now he was here, in Ever Meadow. By dawn, she had packed the locket and a sealed envelope of legal documents into her satchel, hiding them deep beneath her spare clothing. Samuel didn't ask why she was as pale as chalk or why her hands trembled as she folded the breakfast cloth. He simply handed her the first nails of the day and went back to the frame they had begun to raise. Her home was beginning to take shape. The foundation was clear, and new floorboards rested on sturdy joists he had carved himself. She worked alongside him, sweating and soaring, but her mind was 1,000 miles away. By midday, she was balanced on the frame of what would become the kitchen wall when Samuel called up to her. "You building a house or thinking about burning one down?" She blinked, confused. "Sorry? You've driven that nail 3 times in the same spot. You want the board to split?" A hint of a smile touched his mouth, but his eyes were studying her far too closely. Grace climbed down. "I saw someone in town yesterday, someone from before." He nodded, not pushing. "He's not a threat," she said. A lie, thin and sharp as a shard of glass. "But he reminds me of what I left." Samuel set down his hammer. "People like that don't come out here unless they want something. Land, money, or to drag someone back." She met his gaze, and for the first time it felt like she was telling the truth to someone who could hold it. "His name is Charles Barrington. He used to handle legal affairs for my family's company." "Your family's company?" "Yes." Her jaw set. "Whitmore Textiles. Founded by my grandfather, built by my mother, and ruined by men like him." Samuel's silence said more than any question could. "I left it all behind," she continued, the words spilling out. "After the board tried to strip my mother's name from everything. I refused to marry the man they chose. I refused to endorse their expansion into forced labor contracts. So I resigned, gave up my seat, my shares, everything." "Except your name," he said quietly. She shook her head. "I buried that too. Out here, I'm Grace Walker." Samuel exhaled slowly, looking out over the ridge. "So what's he doing here now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I have the documents that prove I legally relinquished everything. He can't touch me." She hesitated. "Not unless he finds a way to drag you back." She nodded. He picked up the hammer again and pressed it back into her hand. "Then we keep building." It was the first time the name Grace Walker felt less like a shield and more like something she had earned, plank by plank. That evening, a letter was pinned to the door of the general store. Samuel found it while trading timber for nails. It was addressed to Miss Grace Whitmore in careful, elegant script. He didn't open it. He just brought it back and laid it on the table between them. "I thought you were using Walker," he said. "I am, but he isn't." She unfolded the letter slowly. "Grace, I mean no harm. I come only to speak. The company is failing. Your departure left a vacuum. The board is fractured. Investors are pulling out. You were always the face of compassion. They want you back. On your terms. Please, just one conversation. CB." She stared at the words until they blurred. "What does he want?" Samuel asked. "Leverage," she said. "He wants me to come back, clean up the mess they made. He thinks I still care enough to fix what they broke. Do you? I care about what it once was, but I'm not sure I believe in saving something that buried my mother and tried to break me." Samuel leaned back in his chair. "So what will you do?" Grace folded the letter neatly. "Nothing. Let him stew." But Charles Barrington wasn't the sort of man to wait quietly. 3 days later, Miranda Caldwell, the new name Helen Monroe had adopted after a hasty marriage to a wealthy out-of-towner, cornered Grace outside the post office. Dressed in her usual lavender coat and a ridiculous feathered hat, Miranda's words were soaked in syrup. My, the quiet little mail-order bride has a past, doesn't she?" Grace narrowed her eyes. "What exactly are you implying?" "Oh, nothing at all," Miranda said, pulling a folded page from her purse. "It's just a bit strange for a woman with no family, no money, and no reputation to suddenly own the most valuable piece of land in this valley? Grace's blood ran cold. What do you have? A friend in Denver with access to legal records. Imagine my surprise when the name Whitmore popped up on the tax auction paperwork. She tapped the document with a manicured nail. You see, darling, secrets don't stay buried long out here, especially when there's power in digging them up. Grace took a slow, steadying breath. If you think threatening me will scare me off, you've sorely misunderstood the kind of woman I am. Oh, I don't want you gone, Miranda smiled sweetly. I want your silence. Barrington wants a deal, and so do I, and if either of us doesn't get what we want, well, I'll make sure your little Walker fairy tale ends in a courtroom. Grace said nothing. She simply turned and walked away, her jaw locked, her fists clenched so tight the nails bit into her palms. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about who controlled the future of that land, and whether the lies from her past would poison the life she was trying to build. Inside her coat pocket, the title deed to the burned homestead rested against her heart. She would not lose it. Not to Charles, not to Miranda, not again. The next day dawned gray and windless. A low fog clung to the ridgeline like an unspoken warning. Grace stood at the edge of the homestead, hammer in hand, staring out at the skeleton frame of the house they were building. The raw boards and freshly joined beams were a symbol of a future that was still possible, if she could just keep the past from swallowing it whole. Samuel approached from the slope, carrying a stack of reclaimed siding. He paused beside her, his eyes scanning her face. You didn't come down for breakfast. Wasn't hungry. That makes two of us. They stood there in silence for a moment. Then he asked quietly, She threatened you. Miranda. It wasn't a question. She threatened to expose me, Grace said without turning. But she's not the real danger. Barrington, Samuel said. He's circling. I think he's using her to pressure me into a deal. She plays the local queen, he plays the puppet master. Samuel set down the boards. So what are you going to do? I need leverage, Grace said. Not just papers, proof, something that will make him back off for good. He studied her, the weight of a long, hard life in his eyes. That means going back into your old life. No, she said, her voice firm. It means pulling what's useful from it and burning the rest. Later that afternoon, Grace wired a coded telegram to an old contact in Chicago. Eleanora Blackstone, her mother's former attorney, one of the few people who hadn't abandoned the Whitmore family during the hostile takeover. The message was short, but every word mattered. Need original deeds and letters. Legal proof of Whitmore shares divested. Urgent. Confidential. Send to Evermeadow P.O. Grace Whitmore. She signed with her real name. Eleanora wouldn't respond to anyone else. Samuel and Grace worked late into the evening, framing the roofline. Grace stood balanced on the high beams, her hair pinned beneath a wool scarf, sleeves rolled up like a true carpenter. Samuel watched her with a quiet admiration. Respect. By nightfall, the moon broke through the fog. Grace sat alone by the fire pit, clutching her satchel. She pulled out the deed, her mother's journal, and the company's original charter. Copies she'd kept since the day she left. She hadn't opened the journal in months, not since the funeral. But tonight she flipped through the pages. One line, underlined in her mother's careful script, stopped her cold. You don't build empires to own the world. You build them so the world can't own you. Grace closed the journal slowly. She didn't want an empire. She wanted something solid, something honest. The next morning brought more than just fog. A poster had gone up on the town's notice board. Upcoming town hall. Discussion of property ownership disputes. Petition to review auction results submitted by local residents. Samuel saw it first and brought it back. Grace read it twice, her mouth a flat line. That's Miranda's doing, she said. She wants to raise doubt, Samuel agreed. If the town opens the floor for public review, she'll flood it with gossip and paperwork until nothing is certain. Even if I have all the right documents. This place runs more on whispers than on laws, he said. If enough people believe that land shouldn't be yours, they'll find a way to strip it from you. She folded the paper carefully. Then we give them something better to believe in. That afternoon, Grace went to the townsfolk, quietly, directly. She helped the Wilkins family mend their porch. She brought medicine to the widow Langston. She read aloud to the town's only school teacher, the blind Mr. Hargrove. She didn't mention her name, her wealth, or her past. She simply helped, and when they asked what brought her to Ever Meadow, she always gave the same answer. I'm just trying to build something worth staying for. By the end of the week, the frame of the house stood solid and sound. Grace walked the perimeter with Samuel, the rising walls casting long shadows over the ground. They reached what would soon be the kitchen door. You did good, Samuel said. We did good. He gave a quiet nod, then hesitated. Why'd you pick here? Because it was broken, she said. Like me. He looked at her then, really looked at her. You're not broken. No, she agreed, a small smile touching her lips. Not anymore. Their moment was shattered by the sound of hoofbeats. A rider was approaching, fast, a telegram clutched in his hand. Grace Whitmore, the boy called out. She stepped forward. Urgent message from Chicago. She opened it right there, under the rising dust. The words were crisp, typed in Eleonora's usual economy. Deeds secured, letters enclosed. Company records show finalization of withdrawal. Barrington no longer legal representative. En route via courier. Warned off by legal threat. Stay safe. E.B. Grace exhaled, a long, deep breath. She had proof. Real, indisputable proof. But it also meant Barrington knew the game was shifting, and men like Charles Barrington didn't fold. They struck back. As night fell, Samuel leaned against the workshop, watching Grace reread the telegram under the lantern light. You've got what you need. Yes, she said, but now I have to choose how to use it. What do you mean? Barrington's not just here for me. He's using this town as leverage. If I go public with everything, he'll spin it. He'll say I'm here to buy up land, to exploit them. If I confront him quietly, I keep control, but I lose momentum. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes the best kind of war, he said, his voice low, is the one no one knows you're fighting. She met his gaze. And the best kind of win? He smiled faintly. Is the one that leaves you standing with both hands clean. Grace nodded. Then, under the hush of the pines and the flickering firelight, she made her decision. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't retaliate with scandal. She would build, brick by brick, truth by truth. And when the time came to face Barrington, she would not raise her voice. She would raise a house, a future, and let that be the loudest answer of all. Grace stood in front of the community hall, staring at the notice nailed to the double doors. The town hall meeting had become the talk of Ever Meadow, the small town buzzing like a stirred-up hornet's nest. What had started as a routine gathering about land use had morphed into a referendum on her right to be here, to rebuild, to belong. Petition to review auction results. Miranda's looping signature was at the bottom. Inside, the townsfolk were already gathering. Grace clutched the envelope from Eleonora in her coat pocket, the one containing proof of her separation from the Whitmore fortune. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like weight. A storm was coming. Samuel stepped beside her, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. We don't have to go in, he said quietly. This isn't a trial. You don't owe them anything. Yes, Grace said, her voice steady. I do, not because I'm guilty, but because silence is what allowed people like Miranda and Barrington to thrive. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The hall fell quiet. Every eye turned to her. Grace ignored them all, walking with calm precision to the front row. Samuel followed, a silent, broad-shouldered shadow. Mayor Holstead banged his gavel. "Let's settle down, folks." Miranda Caldwell rose from her seat, all teeth. "Mr. Mayor, before we begin, I'd like to address a pressing concern regarding the legitimacy of the recent tax auction and the ownership of Parcel 42. A few people muttered in agreement. That land was sold under questionable circumstances to someone with no roots here, and, as we've come to learn, a rather complicated past. Before the mayor could respond, Grace stood. "With respect, I'd like to speak." Mayor Holstead gave a hesitant nod. Grace took a breath and faced the room. "My name is Grace Whitmore. Yes, that Whitmore. But I am not here to take anything from this town. I came here because I lost everything that mattered. My family, my purpose, my faith. When I saw a burned-out plot of land in a town most people couldn't find on a map, I saw something I hadn't felt in years. Hope." Silence. She reached into her coat and pulled out the envelope, laying the papers out on the table before the mayor. "These are legal documents proving I relinquished my shares in Whitmore Textiles. I took no money. I have no stake. I didn't come here to expand an empire or buy this town." Her voice trembled slightly, then steadied. "I bought that land fair and square through a public auction. I've followed every law, and in return I've given my time, my work, and my heart to this community. Ask the Langstons. Ask Mr. Hargrove. Ask the Wilkins kids." The murmurs started again, but this time they were softer, considering. Miranda tried to retake the floor. "And yet she lied about her name. She misled all of you." "I changed my name," Grace said sharply, turning to face her, "because I wanted to be judged by what I did, not by where I came from. But if you're saying the only way to earn respect is by being honest, then maybe you should tell everyone what you're hiding, Miranda, about the 10 acres you're trying to illegally claim just north of my boundary." A hush swept the room. Miranda's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Grace looked back at the crowd. "I didn't come here to fight, but I won't be chased out by gossip and greed. This land is mine because I earned it. With calluses, with grit, with every board raised by hand." Mayor Holstead adjusted his glasses and picked up the deed. "These documents appear to be in order. Unless there's a legal injunction, I see no basis for revisiting the auction." Miranda's face flushed a dangerous shade of red. Then a few neighbors stood. Mr. Hargrove, leaning on his cane, spoke first. "She reads to me every Tuesday. You think I care what her last name is?" Then Mrs. Langston. "She stayed with me the night my roof leaked. No one else did." And then the little Wilkins boy, his voice loud enough to fill the rafters. "Miss Grace fixed our porch." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger, until the whole room was clapping. Samuel's voice was low, but she heard him. "Looks like the town made its choice." Later, as the room emptied, Barrington appeared in the doorway. He hadn't spoken, just watched from the shadows. Now he stepped forward, his suit impeccable, his eyes like a snake's. "You've made quite the spectacle." Grace didn't flinch. "You're not welcome here. You've embarrassed the board. You've made enemies in places that matter." "Good," she said. "Maybe they'll leave other women alone." His smile faded. "You think you've won. But all it takes is one bad season, one failed harvest, one flood, and they will turn on you." Grace looked him straight in the eye. "Then I'll rebuild again." She took a step closer. "And I won't be alone." Samuel moved to stand beside her, a silent, unmovable wall. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Barrington's gaze. "Watch your back, Miss Whitmore," he snarled. Her voice was cold as a river stone. "I stopped being her the day I walked away from you. I'm Grace Walker now, and I don't look back." As Barrington left, the doors shut behind him with a hollow thud. Samuel turned to Grace. "You sure you're ready for what comes next?" She nodded, a determined light in her eyes. "Because now..." Now it's ours to finish. And just outside, in the fading light, the first flower of spring had bloomed through the ash. The storm came 2 nights later. Wind howled over Ever Meadow like a predator, tearing through the half-built homes and weather-worn barns. Grace had just bolted the shutters when the first branch snapped off the old cottonwood tree. The crack echoed across the yard, followed by a burst of rain that swept sideways, stinging like tiny needles. Inside the cabin, Grace, Samuel, and 2 of the Wilkins children, who had stayed late helping with chores, huddled by the fire. The roof above them creaked but held, a testament to Samuel's craftsmanship. Even with one hand, the man could build something that whispered of permanence. Samuel poured water into mugs, his expression unreadable. But Grace could sense the tension in him. It wasn't from the storm, but from what the storm might undo. "You think it'll pass tonight?" she asked. He glanced at the window where the panes quivered in their frames. "Maybe, but it'll leave a mess. And Barrington will be the first one to pounce on it," she said quietly. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The man hadn't left town. Though he'd been silenced in the hall, his presence still pressed on the town's nerves like a thumb on a bruise. Men like him never saw a clean defeat. They only saw a delay. When the storm finally eased at dawn, the land outside looked like a battlefield. Mud coated everything. One of the storage sheds had collapsed. Half the roof tiles on the new kitchen had been blown clean off. But what struck Grace most was the old cottonwood tree. It had split right down the middle, the trunk cracked open like a book full of secrets. They spent the day clearing debris. Samuel worked in methodical, fierce silence. Grace joined him, sleeves rolled high, boots caked in mud. Neighbors trickled in to help. Mrs. Langston brought blankets. Mr. Hargrove guided a few teenagers who came with buckets and nails. And that's when Grace saw it. This wasn't pity. This was belonging. Later that afternoon, while they were hauling beams, Samuel paused. "You ever think about what comes after?" Grace looked up from her wheelbarrow. "After the house is finished?" He nodded. She hesitated. "I used to think I'd leave again, find someplace quieter. But now..." He waited. "I think I'm tired of starting over." A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Hope, maybe. But all he said was, "Good." That evening, as the sun broke through the clearing sky, a rider approached the homestead. It was Walter Jernigan, the postmaster, breathless. He dismounted and handed Grace an envelope sealed with wax. "Delivered express from Chicago," he panted. "Said it couldn't wait." Grace tore it open, her breath catching as she scanned the letter. It was from Eleonora. But this time it wasn't about deeds. It was a warning. "Barrington is petitioning for an injunction against the auction, claiming misfiled notices and procedural flaws. His attorneys intend to freeze all property claims until the matter is resolved. If successful, your ownership will be nullified, at least temporarily. Be prepared." Samuel read it over her shoulder, his jaw tightening. "So he's trying to buy time." Grace looked toward the hills. "Or ruin me before I can settle." That night, unable to sleep, she returned to the workshop. She pulled out a set of plans she'd been sketching. Plans for something larger than the cabin. A schoolhouse. A place for the kids who'd been coming by more and more often. A space for books, for warmth, for safety. Samuel found her there. "You still think we can win this?" he asked. She met his eyes. "We don't have to win on paper. We have to win with people." He nodded slowly. "Then we finish the roof, finish the kitchen, and then we build something they can't take away. But we'll need help," she said. He smiled faintly. "Then we ask for it." The next morning, Grace stood on the old church steps in town with a hand-painted sign. "Community meeting, 4 p.m., the future of Ever Meadow." She rang the bell until people came, one by one, curious, skeptical, hopeful. When the room was full, she spoke plainly. "I came here with nothing but a bag and a lie," she began, And I've tried to earn my place ever since. But I can't fight what's coming alone. I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to protect the idea that a person can come here, start fresh, and belong." She gestured to the back where a large drawing of the schoolhouse was pinned to the wall. "This isn't just about my land. It's about what we build on it. Together." There was silence. Then from the back, old Mr. Tilley raised a hand. "What do you need?" "Labor, supplies, support at the next hearing. I'll handle the lawyers, but I need this town to show it wants me here." Mrs. Langston stood. "I'll bring eggs and bread. It's what I've got." The Wilkins father said, "I got timber left over from our barn. You can have it." Mr. Hargrove added, "I'll teach the first class, blind or not." One by one they stood, not because she asked, but because she meant it. As the meeting ended, Samuel stepped beside her. "You did it." "No," she said, her voice soft. "We're just beginning." And outside, beneath the late spring sun, the land felt lighter. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt like one they could win. The courthouse in Willow Ridge was a plain brick building with peeling white trim and a cracked front step. To Grace, it looked more imposing than any skyscraper in Chicago. She stood outside with Samuel, clutching a folder filled with legal documents and letters of support from the community. Every nail hammered, every storm endured, had led to this moment. Inside, Barrington was already seated with his lawyer, a man whose smile never reached his eyes. They didn't acknowledge her as she entered. Their confidence was a weapon in itself. Grace sat quietly, her spine straight, her hands still. Samuel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder before moving to the back of the courtroom, where a few townsfolk, Mrs. Langston, the Wilkins family, even Mr. Hargrove, had gathered. Their presence steadied her. The judge, a weathered man named Justice Thomason, cleared his throat. "We're here today to consider a motion brought by Mr. Barrington. The petitioner claims the auction of Parcel 42 was conducted with procedural irregularities and should be rendered void." Grace stood. "Your Honor, I respectfully contest that claim. The auction followed all public notice protocols. I submitted my bid legally and paid in full. Mr. Barrington's objection stems not from law, but from a personal vendetta." Barrington's lawyer stood. "Miss Walker failed to disclose her identity as an heir to the Whitmore fortune. Had the community been aware, local opposition would have influenced the auction." "That's not the law," Grace interrupted, her voice calm but sharp. "The law requires legal notice and proper procedure, both of which were satisfied." The lawyer smiled thinly. "We also contend that Ms. Walker's current use of the property, specifically as a community space and an unlicensed educational center, exceeds the zoning permits." There it was, the real target. Not the land, but the schoolhouse. Her vision. Grace opened her folder and handed the bailiff a petition. Over 100 signatures from townsfolk supporting the construction, along with letters from county officials confirming zoning compliance under a community development clause. "I took the steps," she said, her voice steady. "Every board was raised with consent. Every permit was requested and approved. This isn't about zoning. It's about control." Justice Thomason took the packet and read silently for several long minutes. Then he looked up. "I'll need time to review these documents. In the meantime, the injunction stands. All construction on Parcel 42 must halt until a ruling is issued." A heavy silence fell over the room. Grace's throat tightened, but she nodded. "Understood, Your Honor." Barrington's smirk returned. Outside, the sky had clouded over again. Grace sat on the edge of the fountain in the square, the folder pressed to her chest. The ache of it all finally hit her, the feeling that no matter how much she proved, someone would always be there to try and take it away. Samuel stood nearby, his jaw tight. "We'll appeal." "It's not about the law," she said quietly. "It's about exhaustion. That's how they win. By making us too tired to keep going." He crouched beside her. You're not alone anymore. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. Why do you stay, Sam? He didn't blink. Because when I see you fight, I remember what it's like to believe in something again. She swallowed hard. What if believing isn't enough? Then we build anyway, he said, even if it's just hope. That evening, the townsfolk gathered at the edge of the halted construction site. The foundation of the schoolhouse sat silent, the dream frozen mid-breath. Grace stood before them. I can't ask you to defy a court order. You don't have to, Mr. Hargrove said. We're not here to break rules. We're here to plan. Mrs. Langston stepped forward. We'll wait. But while we wait, we'll prepare. Gather supplies, organize lessons, raise funds. Let them see what it is they're trying to stop. A young girl from the Wilkins family lifted a sign she'd painted. Learning can't be injunctioned. Laughter broke through the somber crowd. For the first time in days, Grace felt warmth again. Samuel came to her side. If we can't raise walls, we'll raise voices. Grace smiled. Then we start tomorrow. The next day, Grace returned to the homestead to find a man waiting by the gate. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and carried a notebook. He introduced himself as Thomas Sinclair, an investigative reporter from San Antonio. I've been following your story, he said. The heiress who walked away from everything. The woman rebuilding something from ashes. I want to tell it properly. Grace eyed him wearily. I'm not interested in sensationalism. That's not what I do, he said gently. But if you let me, I'll help you show the world who you really are, and why this land matters. She hesitated, then nodded. One condition. What's that? You tell it from the ground up, not from your office. You live here. You help us work. You learn what it really means. He smiled. Then I'll start by chopping wood. As the sun set over the unfinished frame of the schoolhouse, a quiet hum stirred through the land. The courts could delay, the powerful could threaten, but what had been born here on this scorched soil, in these stubborn hearts, wasn't so easily undone. Grace stood at the threshold, looking over the field of gathered people, of shared burdens and budding hopes. A storm had passed, another was on the horizon, but this time, she was ready. 2 weeks later, a quiet hush fell over the courthouse as people packed the small chamber. They stood in the hallway, they listened through open windows. The hearing that had paralyzed the town's dreams was finally concluding. Grace sat at the front bench, a calm resolve in her eyes. Samuel was beside her. Behind them, rows of neighbors filled every seat. Judge Thomason entered, papers in hand. The murmurs fell to silence. His voice was clear and deliberate. After a review of all evidence presented by both parties, including signed petitions, compliance documentation, and testimony submitted from community members, he paused, glancing at Barrington. This court finds no legal grounds to reverse the auction of Parcel 42 or to issue a permanent injunction against construction. A wave of relief swept the room. Whispers, gasps, a few quickly muffled cheers. Grace closed her eyes, breathing in the stillness of vindication. The judge continued. Ms. Walker acted within her rights. Moreover, the court acknowledges her commitment to lawful development, which is clearly supported by the town of Evermeadow. The petition is dismissed. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel fell. The crowd erupted. Cheers broke out on the courthouse steps. Children jumped. Elders wept. Grace exited into the light. The weight of fear finally lifted from her shoulders. She didn't just see supporters. She saw future students, future teachers, neighbors who had become family. Samuel leaned close. Told you we'd finish what we started. She laughed softly. Now we better build it before another storm rolls in. The next month passed in a blur of timber, paint, and sweat. The schoolhouse rose, slowly but surely. Windows were framed, walls were raised, the roof was sealed beneath an endless blue sky. Volunteers came daily. The sound of hammers and saws was constant, a rhythmic, hopeful music. Thomas Sinclair, the reporter, stayed true to his word. He worked side by side with them, and his articles began to spread. The story of Ever Meadow became a symbol of resilience, of reinvention. One afternoon, a telegram arrived from Chicago. Grace stood at the kitchen table as she read it aloud to Samuel. Eleonora passed peacefully. Final will confirms full transfer of company shares to you. We await your direction. Everett Clay, attorneys. Grace stared at the paper for a long moment, her eyes blurring with tears. It's over. The old life. It's really over. Samuel took her hand gently. Then it's time to live the new one. The schoolhouse opened in late spring. The first day brought nearly 20 children, wide-eyed and clutching books. Grace stood at the front, chalk in hand, her nerves fluttering. She took a breath and began. Welcome to the Ever Meadow School. This building stands because of you, your families, your hope, and your belief that a future can be shaped by more than where we come from. Let's build it together. The children clapped. Mrs. Langston arrived with baked goods. Mr. Hargrove delivered the first afternoon lesson, a story about the stars. Samuel fixed a hinge that had been squeaking for too long. As twilight settled, Grace stepped outside. The school glowed from within, candlelight flickering like fireflies. She walked down the path to the old barn, where Samuel was sitting on a sawhorse, polishing a carved wooden sign. He held it up. Ever Meadow Community School. It's beautiful, she whispered. I had help from the Wilkins boys. He set the sign aside and looked at her, his expression shifting. Grace, I've been thinking. She tilted her head. Uh-oh. I've lost a lot of things. My arm, my past, years to silence. But I've gained something here. And I know we've never said it out loud, but I don't want to wonder what's next anymore. She stepped closer. What are you saying, Sam? I'm saying I'd like to build a home that doesn't just have 4 walls and a roof. I'd like to build it with you. The silence between them was deep and warm, like soil after a spring rain. Grace nodded, her voice low. Then let's start drawing the plans. Later that summer, a small ceremony was held under the cottonwood tree, now blooming again despite its cracked trunk. A crowd gathered as Samuel and Grace stood hand in hand, exchanging simple rings, the wind carrying vows made of quiet strength. Children tossed wildflowers. Neighbors clapped and wept. Thomas took one last photo before he left town, captioning it in his notebook. She rebuilt a homestead, a school, and a life, with one hand to hold and the other free to teach. Years later, long after Barrington had sold his city mansion and disappeared from the headlines, a traveler would arrive in Ever Meadow, drawn by the legend of the woman who turned ash into opportunity. They would find the school still standing, larger now, filled with laughter. They'd find a home behind it, warm and sturdy, where a woman named Grace taught music on Sundays and read by firelight with her husband at dusk. And they would hear, if they stayed long enough, that every spring a celebration was held not to mark a victory, but a beginning. Because in Ever Meadow, the future didn't come from fortune or fame. It came from fire and the choice to rise after. If you believe that anyone can build a new life from the ashes of their old one, don't forget to like and subscribe.